Hello, hello. How is everyone today? You guys are still here on a Friday. That's good, right? And it's the first session of the morning, so that means you weren't out being too crazy last night. So my name is Sargent. I am the Global Director of Workplace at HOK, which is a large architectural firm. And we wanted to give you a little bit of perspective today about the workplace and what lies ahead and what we see, because we're designing those spaces and working with clients that are designing spaces that you all are going to be putting all your information and technology in. So all three of us, by the way, up on stage are members of IFMA's Workplace Evolutionaries. IFMA, International Facility Management Association. So we are all very active and involved in that, and so we're constantly working with clients to figure out what they need to be doing in their spaces and their facilities to really prepare for the workplace of the future. So that's kind of the perspective that we're bringing. And actually, I'm going to go back because I'm going to let Christina introduce herself and then Mike introduce himself. So Christina.
Okay, my name is Christina de Bono, and I'm the founder and president of Cleartech. So I'm like many of you in the AV integration world. In addition to that, I'm on the board of directors of NSCA and a co-leader in the IFMA Workplace Evolutionaries group in Southern California.
Very cool.
DJ
Hey folks,
Mike.
How are you? Mike Petrusky. Although some of you could call me DJ Mike P. If you listen to my podcast, it's called the Workplace Innovator Podcast. I do a weekly show. You can find it on all the normal platforms. I have conversations with industry leaders in the world of facility management, corporate real estate, AV, HR, IT, bring all those silos together in a collaborative way. So we do it with a lot of fun, a lot of personality conversations. Kay's been a multiple guest. You'll see her personality in a second, and it's fantastic. And then we want to talk about the human side of all of this. You know, all this great technology is wonderful, but what do people need and what do they want, and how can we figure all that out as leaders in our workplaces? And that's what I like to talk about. So can't wait to get into the conversation, Kay.
All right, so we're going to start by giving you just a little bit of perspective as far as what it is that we are seeing right now. So we just spent a lot of time with corporate heads of real estate and with the CEOs, and there are 5 things that are top of mind for them right now. So I'm just going to put them all up there. The number one issue that they're dealing with right now is the health, safety, and welfare of the workforce. If that wasn't the case, we never would have left the office in the first place. The second thing is remote work. And how are we first getting people to be able to do it? And now how are we getting people maybe to stop doing it? Because now all of a sudden everybody is kind of immersed in that world. And what is the right balance? Who can, who should, who shouldn't? How do we get people back? I will tell you from the roundtables that we're hosting right now, most CEOs are not seeing the return to office that they desire, but they're afraid to mandate that people come back because there's such a war for talent right now. But they also are afraid for their organization's long-term continuity and resiliency don't. So they're in a conundrum right now that is a difficult one for them to deal with, and we're going to address that a little bit in our discussion. The third thing, of course, is that business resiliency. Now you're going to see a lot in the news right now about the disconnect between the C-suite and the workforce. And the C-suite is getting skewered. But I'm going to say that the C-suite goes home every night and worries about, will the business survive? Will it continue? And will we be able to innovate and do all those things that we need to? The workforce isn't necessarily thinking along those lines. They're thinking more specifically around what it is that they want. Because for a long time, they haven't had any choice at all. So the pendulum has swung wildly to one side. But we actually believe that it should be somewhere in the middle, because we have to worry about the business surviving, but we also want to meet the needs of the workforce so that they are fulfilled, energized, and more sustainable. All right, the fourth thing is the purpose of place. And I'm going to argue that for years, we've designed the office like it was a place you had to go to. In fact, I've been a practicing designer for 37 years. When I first started, there were no fax machines, no computers in the offices, no cell phones, no internet. You had to go to the office to do those types of work. But we don't have to do that anymore. And so a whole new question has arisen around what actually really is the purpose of place today, and how do we draw people to want to be there? Oh, and then the last one, sorry, I jumped too fast, is environmental, social, and governance. The environmental issues, the sustainability, the social dynamics that we're dealing with today, all of those things are top of mind. So these are the 5 things that are keeping the C-suite up at night right now as we go forward. So real quickly, some things that we're seeing. Mike, I'm going to come over here because
Please.
This screen has it and that one doesn't, so I don't mean to stand in front of you. I apologize. Many companies are looking to increase their office presence and to adopt hybrid work. You're going to see some specific statistics around that. In large metropolitan areas like New York City, London, the return to the office is much less than what people planned. Those cities are struggling because, to be honest, return to the office starts with return to the city. And if people aren't comfortable using mass transit or with safety or with any other issues that our cities are struggling with right now, that is a barrier that many companies are having a hard time getting over. What we're also seeing is an emergence of a hub-home-spoke model where people can work in a variety of different settings. And quite frankly, we've been doing this organically for a long time, but now it's just kind of a more formalized approach. Companies that have started their return to work initially saw about 10 to 30% return. And actually for many, it actually hit about 30% and then it dropped back down because the vibe in the office wasn't necessarily what people expected, right? They expected to go back, but then they felt like they were working on a Saturday because not all their other colleagues were there, and so it just kind of felt weird. And so they didn't necessarily stay and stick. So they have not seen the return that they anticipated or wanted. They also are incredibly worried about attracting and retaining the best talent because there is a massive war for talent right now. And so they're worried about how do they attract the best. Many clients are also starting to think about how do we leverage our real estate more intelligently, right? So you've heard some say that they're getting rid of tons of square footage. I'm going to argue that the companies that are getting rid of lots of square footage are doing it for 2 reasons. Number one, they had too much square footage to begin with before the pandemic, and this has just given them an opportunity to actually address something that they've needed to do for a long time. Or number 2, they've gone in hard on remote work and or hybrid work and aren't anticipating people to come back to the same numbers that they were before. And so what's happening right now is that people aren't going to be in the office every day, that we're seeing an increase in you're coming in to meet with people, so we're going to have more gathering spaces, or activity-based working where if you're only there a day or 2 a week, do you really need a 200 square foot office or a dedicated spot for you because you're not really there? And so we're seeing a big increase in that kind of shifting of the way that we work. Organizations are rethinking and reallocating square footage to create better experiences. Again, you can no longer just assume people have to come to the office. We have to entice them to want to be in that office and think about what we can offer them. Many are looking to shed space. Co-working is starting another resurgence right now to mixed success. And we have a lot of developers that are starting to create flex offices, which are kind of like prepackaged suites that are ready to go for those people that need to come in and or to get out of space more quickly. Developers are looking to create that kind of flex space. And there are some companies that are growing significantly. The tech companies, logistic companies, life science companies, they have gone through a massive boom in the last 2 years. And the healthcare sector has also gone through that, except right now, I would argue that the healthcare sector is still in a little bit of triage mode, right? They're dealing with the immediate crisis at hand. But when things calm down a little bit, as I think we all hope they do, then they're going to have a massive backlog and a massive amount of work that we already are starting to see them gear up for. And there's certain sectors, like the financial sector and the legal sector, that we've already heard are saying, come on back. We want you back at least 3 days, if not 5 days. And there are some that are allowing people to work more remotely for a period. A lot of the tech companies initially came out and said, we want people to come back. But then they started to see an exodus, and they started to see other companies like say, we'll give you flexibility. And so the dominoes started to fall. But I'm going to tell you, in my humble opinion, I believe they're lying to most people, because we are designing major campuses for every major tech company right now, and it's not because they expect those places to sit empty. If you look at who is gobbling up all the square footage, it is the tech companies. And so they're telling people, I believe, what they want to hear now to retain the workforce. But at the end of the day, their entire success is driven by people coming together and failing fast in that synergy. And I believe they have every intention of having people back, because we are literally designing spaces right now to do so. So that's kind of a glimpse of what we're seeing right now. Now I want to share some other statistics with you. 52% of those surveyed basically said that they're going to start contracting their real estate to some degree. 9% expected the portfolio to stay the same, and 39% expected it to expand. You can imagine which companies fall into that 39 percentile, right? Those that we just talked about. That landlords right now are expecting tenants to kind of make big changes, but a lot of people are kind of nervous about what's happening. They don't want to spend a lot of money, and so they're just kind of dabbling around the edges. They're not doing a lot. And the economy isn't making anybody feel better about building new buildings and or taking on new debt, et cetera, because of everything. So there's a little bit of reluctance right now in the market to do that. The other thing that we're seeing is that 64% of employees surveyed said that they would quit if they had to go back to the office 5 days a week. Now, I've been around for a while and I've seen cycles, and we happen to be in a very employee-friendly cycle right now. But we will ebb maybe out of that in the future, and that number could change radically. But right now, the workforce is saying that this is what their desire is. And because of that, 6 out of 10 companies are saying that they expect that they will lose talent if they don't offer some flexibility. So how are we doing on this front? So you can look at this chart and see the blue is people that are saying they never want to return to the office, and the gray is those that are saying they rarely want to go. Who's leading the pack on this chart, guys? The US is one of the biggest ones that is saying this. And there's actually for good reason, because in the US, we actually have a sophisticated infrastructure that supports this, has the legislation that supports this, and a lot of people live in areas where they can do this. In Asia, people who have smaller dwelling units with multiple generations find going to the office a relief from that, and working from home has been very difficult. In parts of the world where you don't have the infrastructure to really support people working remotely, it is very difficult. Or in parts of the world where you are not allowed to work from home except under special conditions, it's very difficult. So it's by no surprise that the US is leading the charge in this one. The other thing that I'm going to say is that 36% of the workforce is now considered hybrid workers, and 53% think that they will. Now, who sees that number and thinks that's low? I think that's low. Okay, you know why it's low? I'll tell you why it's low. Because only 60% of the population in the US could even consider being a hybrid worker. So that's not 53% of 100, okay, it is, but 40% of the workforce in the United States is based, whether they're a service worker, they're a lab worker, they're a hospital worker, they don't even have the option to be a hybrid worker. They have to go to a place. So when you consider that 53% of the eligible 60%, that's now all of a sudden seems more in line with what you might have expected. So you got to put all these numbers kind of in context when you see some of these things. The other thing that we know is about 70% of clients right now, our big end users, are thinking about adopting a hybrid method. Does that sound good to everybody? I'm going to tell you I'm worried. Because I don't know about you, but sometimes when you combine two things, it's not necessarily the best of both. Sometimes it's actually the worst of both. Okay? The other day I went to the office, sat in traffic, live outside of Washington, D.C., sat in traffic to get to the office, and the people that I went to meet with didn't come to the office that day, and so I sat on Zoom calls for 8 hours. That was the worst of both, and I was not pleased about either one of those scenarios. We have got to do this right, or it will go off the rails very, very quickly. Because what we know is that we all have had clients that have been working remotely for 30 years. We have clients that have been working in a hybrid manner for a long time. PricewaterhouseCoopers, Deloitte, Ernst & Young, they've been doing this for 10 plus years. But a lot of these companies, their remote work policies have gone off the rails because they didn't put the guidelines in place, or it started to erode culture, or you started to create a tiered society. So there are lessons and warning signs here that we need to pay attention to, because otherwise we're going to be looking back at this moment and realizing that we went in the wrong direction. So we want to make sure that we're doing this right. Now, 70% of companies also are saying that the office is the best place to focus on innovation and creativity. How many people out here are creating widgets? Probably some, because we are actually at a trade show where you guys create this, so that's okay. But most knowledge workers aren't making widgets. And so when we're thinking about productivity, that's not the only thing we should be thinking about. A, we need to think about the quality of what is being produced. And what nobody wants to tell you is quality has dropped, because people are working longer hours, statically sitting there on Zoom calls, multitasking. And they don't have people that they can reach out to, connect with, ask a question, transfer knowledge, etc. Quality is starting to diminish to some degree in certain sectors. The other thing that we know is it's not just about what you are producing. It's about innovation. It's about collaborating. It's about building social capital and trust. It's about connecting to the mission and having that sense of loyalty. And all of those things are things that are a little bit more challenged when you can't come together. You can do it, but it's a challenge. So, we also know that during the pandemic, on the low side, for organizations, on average, it's 25 to 30% of your employees were hired during the pandemic and have never been in an office with their colleagues or others individuals. So they're not necessarily, they don't understand the process or the culture or some of those things that you might get from being together more. And for some companies that are targeting like people right in their 20s, like a lot of the financial companies, they're realizing that 50% of their population has never been in shared spaces. And so that makes it really hard to onboard, to mentor, to coach, to identify. And we have to change the entire way that we're doing things, and we're no longer being able to manage by performance, which by the way, we never should have been doing in the first place. We need to measure by presence. We shouldn't be doing. We want to measure by performance, which is what we should be doing. You didn't call me out. You looked at me funny, but you didn't call me out. By the way, I have 5 kids. You guys can call me out on stuff. You know that, right? Okay, you good? Okay, you ready now? Okay, now I tell you that, right? Okay, now you go. Okay. So, we believe that there are 5 key things that we need to be doing. We need to create an ecosystem of options, choices, and some control. That's what people want. They don't want to be told you have to do this, you have to do that, come sit here for 8 hours, you're stuck, whatever. They want a little bit of options, a little bit of choice, a little bit of control. We need to build back social connections, bond, and that social capital that is eroded. If you think about those connections that you have, and most of us, the more seasoned you are, probably the deeper the connections you are and the more ingrained you are. But for a younger generation that is just coming out of school, they don't have that same bank of social capital with other people, or that same network, or that same, who do I call when I have these issues? And so for them, they ran out of that a long time ago, and it's part of the reason why many of them are struggling and actually want to get back to the office. We need to think about professional development, growth, because proximity bias is a real thing. We need to worry about this. In 5 years, when companies have not met their DEI goals of having more minorities and more women and more individuals that have been marginalized in leadership roles, when we haven't met those goals, we're going to look right back at this point, because who are the people that are right now raising their hand and saying they want to be able to work remotely the most? Women and minorities. And if they're not in the office, then they could be missing out on things unless you have a very sophisticated program to counter that effect. So we need to think about professional growth, mentoring, etc. We need to create great experiences. If you're not giving me anything better than I can get at home, then why should I go to the office? In fact, for a lot of people, they actually have better stuff at home. Every time I go to our office, I lose connections and our Wi-Fi isn't working and I start dropping. And I'm like, I got better connection in my house. And that's a huge driver. So we need to think about creating those great experiences and moments that matter. And we need to try to think about how do we deal with all of this to create equity and seamless transitions between spaces. So that's a snapshot of where we are right now and some of the challenges that we think lie ahead that we need to address. And so I have a series of questions that we're gonna have a little bit of discussion here about what we think. And by the way, if you have, everybody see the Slido? Do we have the Slido thing so we can put that up? So if you have a question, you can go to the QR code and you can answer the question. You can also just do it the old-fashioned way, raise your hand or shout at me. Totally cool with that too. All right, so that's how you ask a question, and I have to figure out how to get it. You have faith in me, ladies? They have faith in me. Okay, so let's go. Let's ask some questions. So I'm going to ask you to put the presentation back up if you can. Thank you. All right, so the first question that I have for you all, Mike, I got to come over here again. Sorry. Is what do we think needs to change about culture to support hybrid work? What do we need to do differently? Mike, I'm going to start with you.
That's the question, right? Culture. It's something I talk about a lot. Love it. I bet everybody out here is listening to Kay and saying, yes, I agree with that, or no, my organization doesn't do that, or boy, I wish they did that, right? Everybody's got their own experience, their own story, and that's one thing I found out by talking to so many people from different industries and different roles and responsibilities, is that yes, everything's different and everything's very complex, but at the same time, human beings have a lot in common and we have this similar experience, a similar desire to be our best selves, to, like you mentioned, be aligned with the mission and the culture of the organization, and feel like we belong, that we contribute, that my skill set applies here and is being valued, right? So what we discovered, I think, we discovered a lot during the pandemic, but over the last couple of years, we've discovered and we've accelerated a lot of things that you mentioned were happening already, right? Remote work, hybrid work, the ability to use technology, the tools are great, it's incredible what we can do today. But we also discovered that there are a lot of what seem to be contradictory statements or experiences. And you see it in the news media, right, all the time. Everybody's got the polarized extreme view that gets all the attention.
Right.
If you're the CEO of a bank on Wall Street and you hear that, we want you back 5 days a week, everybody says you're crazy. If you are on the other extreme and say, hey, we're never going to ask you to ever return to an office again, that may be lauded and celebrated in the near term because our human beings like, yay, I get to choose and never go back to an office. But we also know, as you said, it's not going to work long run. Sustainability and the ability to have collaborative experiences and cultures that provide the spark and innovation we all want is not going to happen if we just go one extreme or the other.
Well, Mike, we had a conversation yesterday even about cameras on, cameras off. And basically concluded that for a lot of people, it's a cultural thing within your company. If your company allows you not to have your cameras on or discourages that, then you don't have to. But if the CEO is basically saying, every time I get on a call, I want everybody's cameras on, or we expect that, or whatever, a lot of that has to do with culture. So even those behaviors that we're having working remotely, I think, are being impacted by culture.
It's a perfect practical example. Here's the other thing. When I talk about culture, I often hear that either I have a great culture at my company, and we had one before we went into our hobbit holes, I say, any Lord of the Rings fans out there, we went into quarantine at the beginning of the pandemic. I was stunned by this. I was a traveling guy like you were, and I had to get habituated to this new situation. And what happened after a period of a few months is I made the adjustment and I became quite comfortable in that hobbit hole, much like Bilbo Baggins sitting by the fire with a drinking pipe in hand. What happened when the pandemic started to ease and the conversation about returning to offices, returning to conferences, returning to public settings in any way, a lot of us just said, hey, you know what? No thanks, I'm doing pretty well, I'm comfortable. But if the leadership or the culture of your organization was one of trust and transparency and empathy, you did pretty well during the pandemic, and you also can have a great experience with virtual meetings, but you also recognize the value of in-person meetings. What happened a lot is a lot of organizations didn't have that culture of transparency and trust, and they didn't trust their employees, so then they started to make moves or not make moves or stay quiet. How many people didn't hear from their leadership for months on end about what we're going to do and what the plans are? Everybody's afraid to make a decision or make the wrong decision during this war for talent, right? So there's all these moving parts and complex situations, but what I always say, back to the Lord of the Rings analogy, is we need people to be leaders. We need Gandalf to come, the wizard Gandalf, to come and call Bilbo out of his hobbit hole to be brave and re-engage in some public way, in some way at the office, for example, or at this conference, and get those sparks of ideas and be brave and do the things that make us successful as human beings and as people. And I think that's what the inspiration we need to do. And I'm not talking about your CEO and your leadership. It's everybody can be a leader. If anybody's a fan of Simon Sinek and the Start With Why, explaining to people the why behind the decisions, absolutely. Leaders are not given by title. They have authority because of their title, but a leader is someone who understands and empathizes and has compassion to anybody they're working with or interacting with. And that's what my podcast is all about. Another shameless plug, if you want to have these types of inspiring conversations and pop culture references and a little bit of music fun, check out the show.
If he doesn't pull out a Star Trek in the next 23
Star Wars,
minutes.
Kay. Star Wars.
Sorry,
I'm sorry, I got to
go. Okay, so Christina, I got to ask. We talk about, do we have the right ecosystem of spaces and the right spaces? So, if everybody doesn't want to go to the office, there's a whole lot of people that don't necessarily want to commute. I mean, Ella, you're from Southern California, notorious for bad traffic, right? So do we have office alternatives in the right places that really will support people working in a distributed manner? What do you think?
Yeah, so I also wanted to just touch a little bit about culture and then I'll address that. I think one of the things that we've learned over the past 2 years and has really struck me is that we have to understand what people are going through. If you're a leader, or if you're a leader of your family, or you're part of a company, and now you're dealing with all the other issues that we've had to address, whether it's children at home, parents who are sick, people who've come down with terrible illnesses over the past 2 years. We have to be understanding of those situations and be able to over-communicate, whether it is to the people who we work with or our clients, or the people who are in our community, because it has been a very, very challenging and difficult time, and we have to acknowledge that and help each other get through this very challenging time. So I just wanted to bring that up, and I felt that in our organization that has been key to over-communicate and to reach out and to find other ways to be able to communicate with each other, because people have had challenges in their lives that they've never experienced before. We've never gone through anything like this before in our lifetimes.
Yeah.
So with the ecosystem, so guess what? Anyone who's in the AV industry, we're like the coolest kids in town now, right? Everyone wants what we have to offer because they're looking to transition their spaces to be able to do more collaboration, to be able to connect people, whether they're working from home or, they're now in, a lot of people from LA, like within the first 3 months, wow, you're in a different place now. Oh yeah, I'm in Idaho, or I'm in Colorado now, or they all moved out. And so we're now having to, as people in this industry, work with clients on coming up with what that new ecosystem is going to be from a technology standpoint, but we also have to understand from the stakeholders' perspective what they're trying to accomplish. And there are different people who are coming into that picture. We used to always just deal with IT, But now IT is really responding to their clients, and they're becoming the people in charge of DEI or HR or the CEO who, or the VP of workplace strategies who's reporting to the CEO, who's now completely transforming their workplace. And so they're looking for new innovative ways of creating that distributed workforce and workplace. And we are the coolest kids in town, but we have to, from a business standpoint, understand what the changing and strategic needs of our clients are to be able to better provide solutions to them that are going to meet their needs. And I'll give you one example. One of the things that we've done over the past 2 years is we've hosted a series of educational programs where we've brought together, someone from JLL, someone who is a facility manager from a major corporation, someone who is in charge of IT from another major corporation. And we've brought these people together to get their different perspectives. And one of the people on one of these educational programs owns lots of real estate and property management divisions, and they were looking to create these new flex spaces, right? And they had a different vision. It wasn't exactly WeWork. They wanted to have a longer term relationship with tenants who wanted to have all the amenities, including things like wireless access, shared social spaces, but that were safe, and so forth and so on. And they wanted to have a technology partner who understood their vision and then could help them create the technology systems, solutions that would meet their needs.
All right, so I'm going to pick up on a theme here. So we're talking about creating workspaces that people can get in and out of more quickly. But I'm going to bring it to the AV/IT industry. I think there are a whole lot of our clients out there right now that don't want to spend a lot of money on a lot of AV/IT that could really help them because they're terrified that they're going to buy something that then is going to become obsolete because things in your world are evolving so quickly and new companies and new stuff is offered every single day that they are afraid they're going to make a mistake, and so instead they make no decision, which is even worse. Okay? So somehow we've got to get to a point where we can create spaces that are more responsive and flexible and easy to get in and out of, and you all need to do the same thing with AV/IT industry. In fact, we actually are talking to several of our clients about AV/IT as a service. Why do you want to buy something that could become obsolete next year? But maybe you pay to have a membership to have somebody come in and provide you what you need, and then they're updating it, they're managing it, and then when you need something new, they're flipping that. And you might pay more for that, but then you always are up to date and you're not worried about, well, I got a bunch of stuff that is antiquated and how do I get rid of it now? I don't have this noose around my neck. So I think that's a big issue. Okay, something to consider. Short answer.
Yep.
Are spaces designed appropriately to support the new way of work? Can people just go back to the office of yesterday, and will that meet our needs going forward?
Yes and no. Both
Yes.
are true. It depends. How's that
Okay.
for an answer?
All right, go ahead.
But here's your point. Explain further. This idea of deciding what to do and make changes and invest in those changes, it's tough. It's a scary thought because you don't want to fail, right? But what we're telling our clients, what I'm hearing on my show is that organizations are piloting programs, they're trying spaces, they're trying strategies, they're trying different ways of working. If it's not working, the people don't respond, it's not bringing the results we're looking for, scrap it, move on. It may be more expensive to do it in the physical world than it is to do in the digital world, but that's the price of success going forward. But back to your point about choice, there's something called the paradox of choice. Okay, and that we all know what this is, right? There's a book written about it. You go into the grocery store, or even better, you go to a restaurant like the Cheesecake Factory, and you've got that big thick book of choices that you can choose for dinner, right? And it's so much, it's overwhelming. Human beings don't like to make the wrong choice. We're afraid of making the wrong choice.
Variety, anxiety.
Exactly. So what do? We need to constrain choice in a framework. A lot of the best workplace leaders I'm talking to and their organizations are doing these pilot programs, creating a framework of here's what we'd like to have in our organization. This is what we'd like to do and to find the results that we think are necessary. And you want to have success too, right? So we want to give you flexibility within that framework. We want you to have autonomy, flexibility, choice, but it's narrowed choice. It's not unlimited choice. It's not chaos. It's controlled choice. So to be practical, you have to do that. In fact, I'll just quote the great Canadian philosopher Geddy Lee, the lead singer of Rush, when he said, "If you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice." Free will, check it out, it's a great song. But that type of thing is real for us. We don't want to be left, flailing around to our own devices, because I make bad choices a lot. I make bad choices for myself. Don't give me that much control.
I'm going to say that I think the auto industry is kicking our ass right now. And I don't mean the AV IT industry's ass, I mean the architecture and design community's ass. Because when I can stay in my house, I can start my car, I can get it nice and warm, I can walk out to it, it automatically unlocks, I get into that car, my mirrors adjust, the music, the temperature, the seat, my phone even syncs with my dashboard. In most workplaces, people are still crawling around under their desk trying to find an outlet. We are not leveraging technology in the workplace nearly to the potential that we could. And I'm also going to say that most conference rooms are really poorly designed, and we shouldn't be returning to them, because for too long, and I will own this again, designers and architects have basically said small, medium, or large, biggest rectangular table I can shove into a room with the maximum number of chairs around it and make it all glass so there's no place to project. Oh, and I'm going to hang some stupid light fixture above the table so you can't project or do anything anyway. And then you guys have to come in at the 11th hour and try to make an AV IT solution work. I haven't been in a good conference room for a long time. And so I think all of that needs to be scrapped, and we need to reset, and we need to rethink it. So if we're returning to that, I don't think it's going to meet the expectations of tomorrow. Okay, Christina, I'm going to give you the next question. Oh, what are we doing? What are you seeing clients do to entice people to want to come back, to create great experiences where people want to be? What are you seeing?
Wow, that's a loaded question.
Free coffee,
so
good food. What are you saying?
So I'll speak from my experience, and it really reflects most of the audience, but we're seeing a lot of clients, again, not to bring back up the coolest kids in town, but who are looking to maximize this employee experience, or in the case of higher education, learning experience, by transforming all of their spaces into hybrid, so that they have that ultimate flexibility. And when I say all the spaces in corporate, particularly in Class A office settings, we're looking at private offices, shared spaces. Every single space is getting that, so that when people come back, they have a fully integrated experience, just like you were describing when you go into your car.
Right.
That's the goal. Now, that's the vision. I'm not saying that that's really what happens in the real world today, but that's where a lot of companies are going. Also with educational institutions, a lot of educational institutions are saying hybrid is here to stay. Students may come back to campus, but they may not always want to go to class. They may want to just remote in to their class. They may want to watch the class after the class is done. They may still be coming back to campus and staying in the dormitories, but they may not always want to be in that classroom anymore. And so a lot of schools are investing in creating that complete hybrid experience.
Interesting. Okay, so Mike, Do companies have the right technology strategy to really ensure equitable connecting? Can someone who is at home have the same experience as someone who is on site in a meeting?
I think the audience can
Actually,
answer
let's
this
get
for
a
you.
show of hands here in the audience. Who thinks that that can be achieved successfully?
Yeah, I think it can be, Kay. But are
About-
we doing it?
Okay.
Are we?
Who doesn't? Because we got to figure out who isn't. Okay. So it's about
Good.
50-50. Okay. All right. So by the way, I want to know, everybody that raised their hand, I want to know what technology you're doing and what you're using. Because we actually have seen some success, but it's some success. Is there a significant shift that companies need to make? Yes. Are most of them doing it?
Some are doing it, yeah.
Some? Okay, go ahead. Mike, what do you think?
I'll leave the technology part of that to you all since you're the experts, but the human side of this is where the challenge and the opportunity is, right? Whether it's trying to create an equitable experience or just a great experience, whether you're doing a hybrid meeting or in person or online. You mentioned the cameras on and off. These are human behavioral decisions.
Right.
And we all make these choices, but someone needs to, cast that vision and create an experience or a culture, back to that word, that allows us to be intentional about being inclusive and being intentional about helping it make those equitable experiences. So I'll just say that, and you keep mentioning the cool kids in the room, and I know many of you are cool. Who knows the movie from the 80s, The Breakfast Club, John Hughes classic, right? I grew up in that era, and I'll tell you what, the one thing I've learned from that movie is, if you don't know the story, it's a Saturday detention with 5 or 6 kids, I can't remember. They're all from different cliques within high school. You got the cool kid, you got the nerd like I was, you got the strange basket case girl, you've got the pretty girl, you got the athlete, and they all come in their silos, right? Tell me where you see the analogy coming together. They operate in their silos in their school, they come together on a Saturday for breakfast club, this detention, and spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, at the end it works out, they all kind of realize they're all just people. And they're all human beings struggling with the same stuff with their families, struggling with the same stuff with their lives. And these same cool kids, other silos experiences happen in our workplaces, in our organizations today. Your AV, your siloed IT, HR, facility management, all the different departments. And what I'm saying is, hey, let's everybody get together and have that more human, purposeful, collaborative experience like the Breakfast Club, and we'll find success in the future of work.
All right, okay. So policies and procedures. We always say that this is one of the most important things, that without policies and procedures, everything goes off the rails. And so a lot of companies have had very, very successful remote working programs, but then it just kind of started going south because people started making up their own rules or doing their own things. So is having the right policies and procedures important, and can you think, between the two of you, what some of those might be? We've got a lot of clients right now that are saying, look, every meeting's either in person or every meeting's on virtual. There's no in between. Others are saying only virtual meetings certain days. What do you guys think about policies and procedures to develop successful hybrid working?
I think just like you mentioned, communicate. We have to be intentional, we have to communicate, we have to tell people, meet them where they are. Expectations have changed. The whole pandemic opened the eyes to a lot of folks that said, hey, I can do this stuff at home, but we also need to say, we need to put, again, that framework together to allow everyone to be successful and bring their best selves to the organization. And here's just a continuation again of the idea that listen, you may think it's a generational problem, right? Or the paradox of those survey results. You mentioned that nearly 2/3 of people say, I believe that our culture is created in person, in an office setting, and we have these sparks of innovation and creativity when we're together. The same number of people say, I never want to go back to an office. How can both those things be true? Well, it's a paradox, Kay, like so many other things. And what I want to say is it's a nuanced conversation that we need to address with our people, communicate to them, be a leader regardless of your role. And it's not a generational question. If we look to the generations above or beyond or below us, younger or older, and say, it's your problem, it's your fault, you don't understand what it takes to be successful in a business. Just quote David Bowie, like back to the Breakfast Club, John Hughes used These children that you spit on as they try to change their world are immune to your consultation. They're quite aware what they're going through. Changes. This mic on?
Okay, see, we had to have a singer in the morning. I love it. All right, so the next question is about leadership, and I'm going to roll into what Mike just said. I spent 2 hours on a call this morning with a client that is going through an extensive change management program, and they're worried that it's not being effective and they're not getting people back. So I asked a question, well, what is it that you're trying to change? What's the change? Is it change in policy? Is it change in space? Is it change in behavior? Like what? And what is the directive? They said, well, leadership is kind of leading it up to the individual business lines to decide what they want to do. Meaning, there is no clear directive, therefore, in the void of that, everybody is making up their own rules. Therefore, no wonder why it's a total mess, because you don't even know what you're changing, you haven't committed to that. Bill Marriott just retired, and one of the things that he said is, leaders need to make decisions and lead and move forward, but do so with empathy. And I think right now we have a lot of people that aren't necessarily leading. So, Christina, are you seeing challenges in organizations that are struggling because they don't have a clear vision of what it is they're even moving to and what the expectation is?
Yes, I would say that would be definitely the case. We're in a field where we're designing, implementing, and supporting technology solutions for organizations that are achieving goals. We're a means to an end. And if the strategy of an organization isn't clearly defined, if that future workplace hasn't been figured out, so to speak, or if it's continuing to evolve, then it's very challenging to be able to provide solutions that achieve goals that haven't been clearly defined. But I wanted to say one other thing about leadership right now. I think over the past 2 years, it's really shook us to the core. And I think a lot for leaders who are going to define the future as being more sustainable, that's going to be more equitable, that's going to be more inclusive, and who are going to be advocating for systemic changes to provide a workplace that's more equitable and that's going to contribute to a sustainable future world for all of us.
All right, so I have one last question, and I'm going to answer my own question really quickly because I think it's a no-brainer, and if anybody in this room disagrees with me, then raise your hand and we'll have that argument. Are HR, IT, corporate real estate, FM, and the business leaders aligned on what needs to happen? No, for many organizations, but that's absolutely 100% imperative that they do. And that is one of the things we need to get everybody at the table. Everybody has to have a strong voice. You guys can't be left to the 11th hour. We can't have one person making the decisions and then forcing everybody else. So I'm going to say that we do that. And I'm answering that question because we had a question from Dave Wilson. Where's Dave? Okay, and your question just disappeared, but I think I read it. Can't we all just meet in the metaverse? Why do we even need physical spaces anymore? Can't we just do the whole metaverse? So, any thoughts on the metaverse? I have lots of thoughts on the metaverse, by the way. And I'll tell you in all honesty, I lead all the thought leadership at HOK, large architectural firm. I say, these are the things that we need to do. I got on a phone call with a whole bunch of my colleagues the other day. I said, we need to explore this topic. Actually, it was several months ago. We need to explore this topic, but I'm aging out on this one. Somebody, where's the 20-year-old that can step in up here and own this one? Because it's not me. Sorry. Somebody needs to do that. And we absolutely have explored that. All right, yeah. So I think the metaverse is actually really exciting, and we actually have a lot of clients that are buying space in the metaverse, and they're making digital twins of their offices so that people can meet in the metaverse virtually. Most of what we've seen so far is kind of clunky. It's not really there yet. It's a little unsophisticated. It's like floating torsos and weird things, and then with the headsets and everything, that's a little clunky. I think as we go forward, absolutely, there's going to be more opportunities for that. but we got to get it a little bit set. So we're at that point now where this is intriguing, this is coming, we got to pay attention to it, but we're not necessarily ready to dive right into that. But we have clients that absolutely are buying space in the metaverse and are already doing that. And in fact, Deloitte, who was here yesterday with us, and Accenture, the Accenture CEO is saying that they've already onboarded, I think it was like 10,000 new hires in the metaverse. That's the way they're doing it. So that actually could be one of the first things. So any thoughts on the metaverse?
Yeah, I agree. Long term, absolutely. A younger version of myself might have said, never, that's crazy, that's not going to work. But I used to say I'm never going to give up my BlackBerry too. And then I finally got an iPhone about a decade ago. So I never say never. But in the short term, in the near term, and what we all know as human beings, that in-person experience, hashtag IRL, in real life, like we're doing here today, or those online, I hope you'll venture back out and go out and find your opportunities. But I think there's something that's irreplaceable about it. And our job as leaders and as technology providers and as workplace designers is to learn from the mistakes of the past. We don't want to go back to pre-2020. We want to do better going forward, create those spaces that people do want, the different, more innovative, more technology, more frictionless experiences. And one last mantra in music, because I think the workplace realizes it made some mistakes in the past. It wasn't that nice experience that it should have been. And as the one-hit wonder band in the 70s Player said, to you, the workforce, baby, come back. Any kind of fool could see I was wrong, and I just can't live without you. Our workplaces can't live without you, so baby, come back.
Who wants more singing in future sessions? Yeah? More singing? All right, we'll do a karaoke thing next time. Thank you guys very, very much for joining us. Our time is at the end, but have a great InfoCon.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.